All right. Well, good morning and welcome to Conversations on Retail. My name is Matt Pfeiffer. It is another beautiful day in Northwest Arkansas, a little bit on the hot side, but a beautiful day nonetheless. We are excited to welcome Tony D'Onofrio back to continue his retail technology series, and this time with a very familiar face. It's going to be interesting to see how Mike Graen does on the other side of the interview as they talk about the retail industry's growing share of the $14 billion RFID market. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping issues. First of all, just a reminder for the folks that are joining live, and there's a good number, almost 600 that have registered or have been invited for this session. If you're joining us live, this is intended to be a conversation and not a presentation, and we would love for you to jump in and be a part of that conversation. And you can do that simply by clicking on the Q&A button in Zoom at any point during the conversation and submitting your questions, your comments, your insights, even pushing back if anything that is said is inconsistent with your own experiences. So again, click on the Q&A button there in Zoom. I know Tony and Mike would love to hear from you. Secondly, just a reminder that the opinions or recommendations that are expressed by Tony and by Mike are of their own and not necessarily of those of Conversations on Retail. So before acting on any of those opinions or recommendations, make sure that they are suitable for your own circumstances. I said that was the last thing, but one other. Tony and Mike have each put up quite a body of work with us already. And if you've missed any of those past conversations, I'd encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@Conversations on Retail. So with that, Tony, I'm going to turn it over to you and our good friend, Mike Graen, to kick off the conversation.
Thank you very much. And a really great pleasure to be with you once again. So lots going on right now in terms of what's going on in retail and those kind of things. And it's really my great pleasure to welcome my good friend, Michael Graen. And what I want to do is actually jump in. I do want to make some announcement at the end. And if I forget, Matt, let's make sure we talk about the retail conference that's coming up on October 18th, because I think that's an important addition to all this type of activities that we're doing. But I want Mike to actually do his own introduction instead of me reading his bio. So tell us a little about yourself and your journey in terms of where you're at now.
Yeah, well, first off, let me echo the good morning as well to all the listeners. Thank you very much, Tony, for having you on. I've admired a lot of the podcasts you've done in the past, and you're right, Matt Pfeiffer. It's weird to be on this side answering questions. I'm usually the one who's asking the questions, but it'll be a good role. I'll have to have Tony on my next podcast so I can ask him some questions. So just a brief background on me. I've been in the industry about 40 years. Started out with a very small consumer products called Procter Gamble, directly out of Cincinnati, and I was there for about 2 or 3 years, probably 5 years total, between that and one of our manufacturing facilities. And in 1989, I got asked to come down to work directly with a customer called Walmart. And I won't go through the whole story, but just suffice it to say, P&G was a big consumer products company. Walmart was a big retailer. We did not like each other very much, and we really needed to reinvent the relationship between the two companies. So I came down, and I was one of the first ones on the ground here, kind of played an information technology role. Did that for about almost 20 years or so. Then I left P&G, and then actually left P&G on a Friday, and Monday morning I was a Walmart associate. Some people say if you can't beat them, join them. So I joined Walmart in about 2008. Was very actively involved in something called Retail Link, which is a retailing platform, but really spent a lot of time both at P&G and Walmart in the on-shelf availability space. Led Walmart's RFID program for a number of years. And well, I'm sure we'll get into some of the specifics of that later, but left Walmart when there was some patent litigation lawsuit across the industry, and it looked like RFID wasn't going anywhere. Then got called back a couple of years later to come back as a contractor for Walmart. So I've basically been working with Walmart for about 40 years, 30 years, something like that. Gotten a chance to see both the supplier side as well as the retailer side, as well as spent a little bit of time at CROSSMARK, which is a third-party service provider that supports a lot of the work inside of Walmart. So been very actively involved in the on-shelf availability, specifically on RFID and Retail Link, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you, Tony.
Thank you, and that's excellent background. And I also, exactly to your point, you actually are typically on the other side with your own conversation on retail in terms of on-shelf availability. Tell our audience exactly what that series is about in terms of what you're trying to deliver through that series.
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that I think is fascinating is that retail as well is always changing, right? I mean, from the first time a store got opened up, some of the things that are very important, such as sales and customer satisfaction, et cetera, are always front of mind, profitability, some things like that. One of the things that I think is incredibly important to the customers who shop in a store is having enough confidence to know if I leave my house and go into a retail store, that what I'm going to look for is going to be available. There's nothing more frustrating than going into a store and finding out what you're looking for is not available at that particular store. We're going to spend some time kind of talking about that later, but on-shelf availability is kind of my strategy. I believe every retailer needs to be understanding that OSA, on-shelf availability, is one of their key KPIs or key metrics that they need to have. They need to have goals for it. They need to be able to measure it. And by the way, there's lots of different ways to measure it. And they have to address issues when things are not available for the customer. Because ultimately, and I'm sure we'll get into this, customers are choosing every single day where they spend their money. And if you consistently disappoint them, they'll find another approach.
No, that's really interesting. Is there one episode that stood out to you? And can you tell me why? I mean, I know you've done quite a few, way ahead of me. I think this is only my third, and I've lost count in terms of how many you've done, but anyone who stand out to you?
Boy, that's like saying which one of your kids do you like the most? That's really a hard question to answer. But I will give you one that I think is really pivotal, and I'll be interested in Matt Pfeiffer's reaction because he's been part of every one of these as well. We did one, I'm going to say about 6 to 8 months ago, that focused on something called omnichannel. So it's the whole idea of customers having the freedom to buy things in a physical brick and mortar store or order them online. We call that buy online or pick it up in store, or research online, pick it up in store. I believe we had Dr. Bill Hargrave, who's now the president of the University of Memphis, Justin Patton, who runs the RFID lab down in Auburn, and a very special guest by the name of Deanna Baker. Deanna was the senior vice president at Walmart, who I worked with for probably 10 of the years that I was with Walmart. But she's the one, and we'll get into this in a little bit, she's the one that basically said, I don't understand this technology set, but I can tell you one thing. I want to be able to have our customers order apparel in our stores and be able to deliver them to customers just like we do milk, egg, bread, cheese, and, by the way, socks, right? And she wanted to do that. And she said, how do I do that? Well, I said, the first thing is you'll disappoint a lot of customers because your on-hand is about 50% accurate. And so she created a journey that basically said, I got to figure out how to get my on-hands more accurate. So when somebody orders it, I don't disappoint them. So my favorite episode of all those was her testimony. You can go back and listen to the archive where she said, I realized we had to change. I didn't believe some of the stuff I didn't want to think about RFID the way we did in the past, which is some failed attempts that we tried. I'm willing to go back and re-explore it. I have an industry problem. It's not just my problem. And there's a lot of other retailers that are leveraging RFID to do that. It will take a business sponsor who sees a business problem. RFID is not a technology project. It is a change management project, and it needs to have senior leadership in the business driving it to make it successful. So to me, that Deanna Baker is probably more than you want to know, but that Deanna Baker episode was critical because it took a champion like that, and we'll learn a little bit later when we talk about this, Walmart is making tremendous strides to expand that capability across the box.
No, and that's an excellent feedback. It starts exactly that. Somebody's got to stand up and say, this is going to change the business, and that's extremely true, and it starts with the customer.
Well, let me build on that a little bit, because a lot of people, and I don't mean to put anybody's effort down, but anytime somebody says, we're going to go into a tech lab and prove that this technology works, I kind of go, wait a minute. This is not a proof of concept. There's no longer a question whether this technology works. The question is, do you want to invest what it's going to take from an organization standpoint, from a supplier engagement standpoint, to make the changes necessary? RFID is not a tech project. RFID is a change management project, and it's going to require business leadership sponsorship, not something done in a tech lab somewhere.
Extremely well said, though. But you also just did an episode on the state of the industry as it relates to on-shelf availability. How would you summarize where we're at right now in terms of this journey in getting on-shelf availability under control?
Yeah, this is one of those. Any point in time with any given retailer, with any given situation, you're either improving or you're getting worse, but the most important thing is to measure it. I would say my perspective is it's a problem. Is right now probably more of a problem than it's ever has been. I mean, we're still coming out of the global pandemic issue and supply chain issues and stuff like that. Feels like most of that is behind us. There are still things like on-hand accuracy issues, a shortage of labor, enough people to literally put the product back on the shelf and things like that. I still think there's a huge opportunity for both suppliers and retailers to share data in a meaningful way. I'm not just talking about EDI transactions, but really sharing data around demand forecasts and things like that, so we can get a streamline of it. But I would say it's probably worse than it's ever been. It's a big opportunity, and if we don't figure out how to get it fixed, the customers are going to make choices to go other places because they, at the end of the day, have options like never before.
Correct. And the smartphone is actually, I accelerated that because I can actually make that choice while I'm sitting in your store and say, I'm going to buy for your competitor because you don't have it. So
you go to the retailer, you will go to buy the product, you want to be loyal to that retailer, they don't have it. And so you use that retailer's Wi-Fi and pull out your phone and order from their competitor, right?
That's correct. I've done that myself a few times. So that's correct.
I have as well. And I just wonder how many retailers realize that that's happening. You're paying for a customer to actually buy from your competitor using your Wi-Fi. I think that's kind of
correct. That's it. Well, let's move on. Let's talk about customers and also, this is actually one of my favorite quotes that was actually part of your deck. So tell me why you actually have it in your deck.
Well, as part of my journey to relocation down to Northwest Arkansas, I actually had the honor and privilege to work with Sam Walton. It was an incredible honor. He was an incredible leader, very humble individual, but a very strong leader from a retail standpoint. And we were having some of the biggest challenges between Procter Gamble, Walmart during the early days. He told me something which had always permeated through with me, and this is what he said. Mike, if you thought of your company as an extension of my stores, you would treat us a lot differently. Let me say that again. If you thought of my company, Walmart, as an or your company, Procter Gamble, as an extension of the stores that you're servicing, I'm really not the customer, Mike. The customer is the person who's buying Tide detergent in a Walmart store. And by the way, and that's where this quote came, one of these quotes came, is like, at the end of the day, are we meeting that customer need? So don't think about meeting my needs. Think about meeting the customer's needs who's buying the product in the store. And after that, I saw this quote, and I don't think it was because of the discussion we had, but his comment was very true. And Doug McMillon, the current CEO, has said a very, very similar thing. But basically, customers can fire you every single day just by spending their money somewhere else. And that's just as relevant when he said it as it is today, because we just talked about, if I go into Walmart, they don't have what I want, I'll use their Wi-Fi to order that product from Amazon and have it delivered to my house. So the customer ultimately has the choice, and they will find the product. Somebody will satisfy that need. And you can do that a few times, but eventually customers lose trust in you and start just changing their shopping habits to go somewhere else. So I think this is really important.
I totally agree with you. And you are correct. He is a great leader. I actually have his 10 rules for business success on my wall in my office in a very large poster. I encourage all of our listeners to actually look those up. They are down to earth, but man, are they meaningful in terms of how do you actually win in retail. It's down to the basics, but those basics all point to the customer as being at the center of everything. So those, again, look them up if you haven't seen them.
Well, Doug McMillon, the current CEO, has one that's somewhat similar to that. He said, at the end of the day, there's not a lot of loyalty there. You either meeting the customer's needs or you're not. There's not a lot of loyalty to where they get the product. They're going to find the product. So in an omni-channel kind of world, if it's not in a brick and mortar store, I'll be able to find it in some other location and have it shipped to me. And you will end up losing customers in the process. So I think it's always important to keep focus on the fact the customer, where they spend their money is where they make a decision to invest in.
Well, good. We're already getting good engagement for the audience. They love this quote, number one. Number two, we actually have a retailer asking, how quickly is RFID moving into other verticals like pharmacy, outside of apparel, footwear, electronics, where it is strong? So that's the question coming from the audience. What do you think?
Yeah, so here's what I can tell you. RFID has been around since World War II. They used to do RFID on, military equipment. It started taking hold in what I'm going to call 2003 kind of time frame, when companies like Procter Gamble and Walmart started to use RFID for case and pallet level tracking purposes. There has been some I won't take you through all of it. There's been some starts and stops with that, some of which are, hey, the technology is not quite ready yet, all the way to we're really using the technology for something it wasn't intended to be, to patent litigation lawsuits on the industry. There's a lot of reasons we've kind of started and stopped. What I can tell you now is almost all of the apparel retailers that I'm aware of, not only in the U.S., but globally, are using RFID to know what they have and know where it's located. So it's clearly a best practice, if you will. And we just talk about people like Walmart. These are all public companies. I'm not sharing anything that they wouldn't share themselves. People like Walmart, people like Target, people like Macy's, people like Nordstrom's, people like Dick's Sporting Goods, The Gap, Adidas. You find all these retailers are basically leveraging RFID. Now, to whoever asks the question, it's an obvious next step of, okay, if it works in apparel, does it work in other places? And clearly there are retailers that are dramatically looking, and Walmart's made it very public, that they're going into a lot of general merchandise space. So things like automotive tires, automotive batteries, electronics, sporting goods, toys, hardware, paint, home and garden, lawn and garden. I mean, all of these areas are already being used for RFID. We do know other retailers that are using it for things like cosmetics. We know retailers are starting to look at it for food, not only for on-hand accuracy and location, but also to use that for date coding product and knowing when that product needs to be marked down for a quick sale rather than have to destroy it. Pharmaceuticals are already being required to serialize all their pharmacies. It's not out of the realm of possibility that RFID could play a role in that as well. So I think it's clearly the expansion is huge. I see a lot of other categories and a lot of other use cases that we'll talk about here in a little bit being used for RFID. I will make a caution. It is not a silver bullet. It doesn't make sense for all categories. So before people go, well, we just do everything in the store, some categories make sense, some categories don't. For the most part, it is definitely an apparel, general merchandise, high shrink kind of categories, and potentially pharmaceuticals and food, where it makes a lot of sense.
Well, the question I think is also getting down, because I'll qualify it because I'm familiar with the topic, is there going to be a day where a Procter Gamble source tags their products with RFID, do you believe?
That's a great question. I wish I had that crystal ball. I don't believe that there will be a day where all products are RFID tagged in a big mass merchandiser like a Walmart. Now, do I believe that an apparel retailer or a sporting goods retailer or an electronics retailer could have all their stuff source tagged? Yeah, I do. I definitely see that as a very much of a potential. When you start looking at a Costco or a Sam's Club or a Target or a Walmart or all those kind of things, are we really going to put RFID tags on, cans of soup? I don't think so. All right. Are we going to RFID tag watermelon and cantaloupe? I just don't think so. No. And my personal belief is, and we'll get into some of the use cases here, when you have a high level of substitutability, what do I mean by that? If I go into a Walmart store and I have strawberry Pop-Tarts on my list to pick up, and they don't have any strawberry Pop-Tarts, I'm coming home with Pop-Tarts, or Ruthie will be mad at me, right? So it's going to be, hey, I don't care if it's private label. I don't care if it's changing from strawberry to blueberry. I'm going to buy those particular products. Plus, the grocery side, it turns so much, Tony. I mean, we're talking about selling multiple a day. That turn works so well that I don't know that we definitely need RFID at this point in time for the purpose of inventory accuracy. Unlike things that are low substitutability. So Pop-Tarts are high substitutability. I'm going to leave the store with, I may not got what I wanted, but I do know I'm going to leave the store with Pop-Tarts. Let me give you another example. Automotive tires. You have a truck and it takes a certain size tires, and you go into a store like a Walmart and you go, I need 4 tires. And they come back and go, Tony, I got 3. Do you want us to put 3 on? No, I don't want you to put 3 on. Do you have any other option? No, I'm going somewhere else. Substitutability is very, very important. Printer cartridges, those kind of general merchandise, socks, shoes, things like that, where I need to have the size and the style that I'm looking for. I don't have a lot of substitutability options in that store. So at this point in time, I believe those are the categories where we're going to go next, which is all the general merchandise. I think there's use cases for other things like pharmacy and things like that. But to me, in a consumable business like bread or grocery or dry grocery or even the Tide detergent, we've got all kinds of Tide on the shelf. Do I need to really put RFID tags on everything? Probably not. So
we're getting a ton of questions. So
I bet we are too.
And I will get to some of these questions as we go, but I want to make sure we also share with you some data, because as most of you know, I also like to share data in these types of webinars. So let me move on. So inventory distortion is a huge problem. The latest research that was just published by the IHL group is 1.77 trillion. What are your thoughts in terms of inventory distortion?
Well, to define that 1.7 trillion inventory distortion, that to me, it looks like it's both out of stocks on one hand and overstocks. That feels like a huge number worth people paying attention to, number one. Number two, I would say it's pretty interesting that it's roughly, 2/3 out of stock and 1/3 of overstocks. The out of stocks are the ones that are going to disappoint the customers, right? Having too much of something that'll disappoint the retailer because they got to do it because of stuff like that. So there's clearly advantages for, here's what I would tell you. Every retailer, and this is hard to do, but I think it's important. Every retailer needs to know exactly what they have and exactly where it is at all times. Now, that's a nice, easy thing to say, but the reality is they don't know what they have or don't have or where it's located. Otherwise, they wouldn't have overstocks and understocks. So the key is figuring out how you measure these things and then put them into your KPIs, because I would believe that most retailers don't know how bad they are out of stock. Or they aren't even able to say, what is your actually on-shelf availability to the customer, number one. Number two, how do you measure it, right? Yeah. Those are very, very important questions that are not trivial questions. They're really hard to measure, but they're very, very important as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then they actually list on this chart too the 4 primary areas in terms of where the problem exists. And I'm just going to focus on the top 4, which are suppliers, retail personnel, internal prices, and theft is also up there. And in fact, there's a question in our Q&A that talks about exactly that, theft and how it gets impacted by these types of solutions. So any general comments on these sources of the blame for inventory distortion?
Yeah, this one's an interesting one. From my perspective, supplier issues, that sounds like it's the supplier that's the problem. Sometimes it's the retailer's communication with the supplier that's the problem. Like, I don't order. All of a sudden I order a whole bunch and I want it next week. I don't have it. So that looks like a supplier issue, but it's really more a retailer engaging with the supplier and giving them an accurate forecast of when they want to have it, et cetera, so they can plan their manufacturing that way. So while supplier issue looks like, wow, the suppliers need to get their act together, here's the deal. The suppliers are interested in selling their stuff as well. I mean, they're not in the business to not meet the customer's expectations, right? So it's not like they're, well, we just don't want to do it because we don't feel like it today. That's not what they're doing. What's happening is typically, yeah, there are issues in the supply chain and raw materials and all that kind of stuff. That stuff does happen. Most of the time, I've seen communication between the supplier and the retailer not be the way it should. And I didn't have any idea you were going to order that much. Where did that come from? I don't have that much product. And well, you say that's a supplier issue. Well, is it really? Or is it a retailer not communicating what their expectations are? Personnel issues, I don't know what that means other than store associates not doing what they're supposed to do. I would argue most retailers are struggling with getting enough labor in the store to actually do those things, right? So it's not necessarily a personnel issue. It's literally trying to find people who want to go and work retail. It's hard work. It's dirty work. It's very tedious work sometimes. It's very exhilarating work when you get to help a customer out, but there's a lot of stocking and stacking and price changes and a whole bunch of other stuff that goes with that. So I can certainly understand the personnel issues. Tony, the theft one is an interesting one to me because I don't know how we measure that. How do you measure a consumer or a shopper theft versus an employee theft versus I didn't get what I paid for? You know, we could spend a whole 4 podcasts on just the theft situation and asset protection, and everybody sees the smash and grabs that are going on in stores, and those are real. Those are absolutely positively real. My challenge is, and you and I both have a good friend in Brad Elverson who spent so many years at Walmart. He was like, well, what percentage is consumer theft? Well, I'm going to say this. Well, how much is, what's that? I'm going to exactly. Yeah. Here's the deal. No, how do you measure this?
Exactly.
My son is a market asset protection manager for Walmart in Idaho. He does inventories with all of the stores. He's got 10 stores in Oregon and Idaho. He goes in and he literally stops the process, counts everything in the store, compares it to what he should have, and that gives him a shrink number. And I go, well, what's that like, son? He goes, it's kind of like going to California, putting a big piece of cardboard over my dashboard, driving to New York, and by the time I get back to New York, I pull the sheet off and go, oh, I almost ran out of gas. Oh, I almost ran out of oil. Oh, I was overheating. I have no idea because once a year is when I get the report card. And certainly we've got to come up with better ways of measuring consumer theft and employee theft and receiving issues, et cetera. There's technology out. And here's one of the use cases of RFID. Every time something comes in the store, I can measure it without throwing a person at it. To literally have an RFID tag read. Every time something leaves the store, whether it leaves the store with a shopper or whether it leaves the store from an employee, I should be able to measure that. Did it go through the register or did it not go through the register? So I know we'll get into this, but to me, the asset protection, loss prevention use case of RFID has an enormous capability that has not yet been quite realized.
I totally agree. And I agree with that in terms of this. But let's keep going because we've got a lot to cover. We also have a lot of questions. So I will get to some of these questions. So I really appreciate the audience engagement. So this is actually one of your charts in terms of interesting tidbits in terms of stats. So can you highlight the ones that are important to you?
Yeah. So my perspective is this goes back to kind of the comment I made before, which is, you know, people are noticing that product continues to have on-shelf availability issues, whether it's canned foods or toiletries, et cetera. These items are important items for the customer to have things delivered to their home and or to be picked up in store. This next one is pretty interesting because what's saying is without actually sending the message to a shopper, your availability gives them an indication of whether they're going to come back and shop. This limited loyalty, I think, is pretty important. We've all gone into a store before and the thing has just been demolished. There's out of stocks everywhere, there's trash everywhere, etc. You can put up with that once or twice, but if that's a consistent behavior, you're probably going to go somewhere else, because if that's the way they run the store, that's not good. So 80% of shoppers have noticed that shelves are out of stock or low stock than usual than a year ago. So shoppers are making those determinations. And now what's happening, what's fascinating, is you have retailers who normally were responsible for stocking the shelves and taking the customer money. In a lot of scenarios, they're adding a third leg to their platform, which is shopping on behalf of customers. So you're having the retailer actually do the shopping and simulating what it feels like for a customer, and they're complaining the stuff is out of stock all the time. So interesting transition. Bottom line is, this certainly goes back to Sam Walton's quote. You know, at the end of the day, you disappoint a customer, they're going to go somewhere else. And so that's
totally correct.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to quickly want you to answer a couple of the questions, because we're getting a lot of questions. So one of them is on sustainability. How does RFID help with sustainability, do you think? Reducing waste and supporting the sustainability efforts?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. Actually, some people would argue RFID goes against sustainability, right? Because you're putting an actual RFID tag on product that, quote, doesn't make it sustainable anymore. Now, I am not a recycling expert by any stretch of the imagination, but as I talked to my friends at Avery Dennison, they said one of the things that happens when something like a piece of cardboard gets recycled is they end up turning that paper into more of a slurry or a slush, and the metal kind of falls to the bottom. So there is a recyclability component to that. Here's the other thing. I think we need to kind of think outside the box. If you actually RFID individual selling units, I wonder if RFID could be used, just thinking outside the box, in the landfills to find out how much of that product is coming in that potentially could have been recycled and it really got thrown away. So instead of thinking about it as a negative, let's think about it as, can we leverage RFID even in things like landfills to figure out what percentage of the stuff is being thrown away versus recycled?
Yeah, and I think you can also track, point of origin. You can also track in terms of what happens to it through the supply chain to make sure it gets sold at the right time. So in other words, making sure the right products are on the shelf sooner so you can sell them and you're not actually throwing them away. So there's all kinds of other ways that I think RFID can cut the wastage.
In the food area, to me, there's a untapped potential in the food area. When you start thinking about how much food gets tossed,
correct.
And unfortunately, let's go back to the personnel, we call it personnel issues. Sometimes personnel issues are, hey, we didn't go through today and actually go through all of our bread to make sure that we put some of this that was made a couple of days ago on a reduced for quick sale rack. So instead of doing a markdown where we take a little bit of loss, we end up having to throw it away. Well, throwing away food is not a big idea, right? That's a bad idea. So if we can start to leverage RFID, because RFID has not only, we'll talk about probably this later, RFID gets you ability that says, not only that this is UPC, but I know exactly when this product was delivered or created or baked or whatever it happens to be. Add 4 days to it, that's when I need to mark it down. Add 2 more days to it, that's when I need to throw it away. So I can start to reduce and mark down things rather than throwing away. And to me, that's a big idea from a food waste perspective.
Yeah, let me ask the other question, because at the end, the retailer actually clarified. They were looking for, are we going to get to some places like basically source tagging some of these high-tech items like cough and cold and allergy and face care? Some of these products that are being stolen or not, can we get to source tagging, and how do actually get that started as a process is what they were actually asking. Not the pharmacy, not the pharmaceutical.
Yeah, and that's a great question. Unfortunately, every time you ask a question, you end up pointing back to yourself, because the only ones, the programs that I've seen that are the most successful, is when a retailer decides they're going to implement RFID, and their expectation with their suppliers, it's tagged at source. It gets tagged at the source when it gets manufactured. If you try and tag it at a distribution center, or even worse, in a store, You can do it for a while, but that becomes very, 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 very challenging to make sure everything's tagged correctly. So supplier, if we talk about the success model of RFID in apparel, let's talk about a couple things. Number one, for the most part, it's tagged at source. Forget the vertical folks for a second, but for people like Walmart and Dick's Sporting Goods and Nordstrom's and Target, their expectation is suppliers, we expect you to tag it at source. We expect it to be source tagged all the way through the supply chain, and we start taking advantage of those tags there. So back to the retailer, whoever asked that question, it's not a quick fix, but here's the deal. If you think cough cold should be RFID tagged and you want to be able to leverage that, you got to start engaging with your suppliers now, make a decision. First off, get a sponsor who's going to drive this from a business standpoint at your retail organization. It's high enough that's operations and merchandising. Number two, decide you're going to leverage RFID for the purpose of knowing what you have and where it's located. Number three, come up with a source tagging plan and communicate that to your suppliers and hold them accountable to that. And then while that product is getting source tagged and it's coming through the supply chain, you're standing up your RFID solution to take advantage of those tags when it hits the store. That would be my recommendation. People aren't going to just start source tagging it just because. They're going to source tag it because somebody said, this is an expectation I have of doing business with us. I would also say, as crazy as this sounds, Tony, major retailers who are direct competitors need to collaborate and make recommendations on categories. You're smiling like, what did I just open up?
No, you're totally correct. You are totally correct.
I think it's okay just to call this out. Walmart and Target and CVS and Walgreens, if you all get together and go, hey, we all want to do cough cold. Let's just call that cough cold with RFID. Walmart saying it versus Target, et cetera, that becomes kind of a, they're asking for it and they're not. And so if I'm a cough cold, I go, I'll tag some of this stuff, et cetera, to drive substantial change in the industry. If you all get together and go, we're all going to ask for this over the next couple of years, why don't you go ahead and tag it all? Because then the suppliers can start leveraging. Number one, they don't have to have, this SKU is tagged and this one isn't, so I'll create a different SKU for it. They can tag it all and they can start leveraging RFID in their own facility. So if the retailers, and this idea of collaborating across retailers sounds like it's antitrust violation. It's not. It's just setting expectations, saying we're all going to look for the same thing. So if you're going to start doing tagging for a retailer, then tag it all, because eventually all the retailers are going to take advantage of it.
No, you've nailed it. That's exactly it. It starts with the retailer, and then from there you work to the rest. But let's keep going, because I want to get to those use cases and all that, and we're going to run out of time. I'm going to quickly stay on this chart because they're asking a lot of good questions. This chart is actually one of mine, and what it shows that Prime members, Amazon Prime members, first of all, there's a lot of them. There's 200 plus million of them, and they're primed to actually switch immediately if you're out of stock. That's number one. It's on the chart. The other thing that's on this chart, it says that who do you trust? They actually have it in stock. The highest trust is not in a retailer, it's in Amazon. So that gives you an idea how important it is for retailer to actually get their in-stock under control. So that's my comment. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I've got a different slide from IHL that I typically quote. It's a little bit different than this, which is, and this is pretty amazing. Amazon Prime customers, when facing out of stocks, are 73% more likely to use their own phone to order stuff. Here's the other one. 25% of Amazon's current revenue comes from customers who tried to buy it in the store first. And that's a soundbite for you.
Here's what's amazing soundbite.
Here's what Amazon's got. They don't have customers coming in and taking product and putting it into the other side of the store so nobody can find it. They don't have organized retail crime people going into their warehouses and stealing stuff. They don't have customers stealing stuff. They don't have associates or employees stealing stuff, right? They don't have, for the most part, they do a pretty good job of making sure they get paid for everything they receive at the distribution center. Well, so Amazon doesn't have a, what do I have and where's it located? I've never done an out of stock study or a on-hand accuracy study, which is the term that we typically look at, my guess is in an Amazon fulfillment center, your on-hand accuracy is pretty good. You know what you have and you know what's located. You open it up to a retail store where you have thousands of people running around the store all the time. Who knows where your stuff's going to show up? So by definition, Amazon's going to be better. Here's what I would argue. I would argue that customers want to be able to support businesses near them. And if I've got, and I'm just going to toot Walmart's horn a little bit, if 90% or 95% of the U.S. population is within 10 miles of a Walmart store, and I can get something in an hour versus a day or two from Amazon, I'm going with that, right? So I like the people who are omni-channel, who have both brick and mortar locations as well as omni-channel. I like their ability to be able to win in the future, but Amazon is clearly taking market share from a lot of brick and mortar retailers because they don't know what they have and they know where it's located. That's where Amazon's going to win.
And that, again, brings back to exactly your full point about how important our shelfability is. So let me keep going again.
Yep.
This is actually, again, from you. So tell me what this is telling you.
Yeah, I've kind of mentioned this one already a couple times because knowing what you have and know where it's located without human intervention, that means nobody scanning stuff and nobody doing audits and nobody taking a gun. Our personnel are valuable resources in a store. They should be there to take care of the customer. They shouldn't be there to scan stuff, to wand stuff. I understand that that's a part of the expectation, but this to me is a big idea. Can you tell me what you have in the store and where is it located without human intervention, without somebody scanning and wanding and doing all this other kind of work? That to me is going to be a disruptor in the retail industry. If I can literally virtually lift the lid off a store and look down and go, hey, I'm looking for this particular printer cartridge. Oh, I've got 2 here, 3 here, and 1 here without somebody going and scanning it. That's a game changer. And we've got to figure out how to get there, because what we also want to do is expose those on-hands to customers to go, no, I have 3 of them. They're right here. I know exactly where they're located. Today, retailers hide inventory from customers because they're not sure if they really have 3. So I don't want to tell them 3 and then disappoint them. They hide that inventory. Dr. Hargrave calls that, well, I'm just hiding inventory. That's because I don't want to disappoint a customer. Well, if I know exactly what I have and where it's located without a human being having to go look, that's a disruptor in the retail industry. And I think it's a big opportunity.
Totally agree. Let me keep going again just to make sure we cover some. So retailer adoption seems to be increasing. So general trends that you're seeing, I know there's some logos on here, but general trends that you're seeing in terms of the adoption rates.
From each one of these retailers have publicly communicated that they are leveraging radio frequency identification as the ability, as one of the tools to be able to understand what they have and where it's located. And I don't think that trend is going to change. I think it's going to continue to grow. To our conversation earlier, I think other categories beyond apparel, these are all for the most part focusing on apparel. I think things like home and general merchandise and electronics and sporting goods, those are all coming down the road. So if you're in any of those general merchandise categories, you might as well figure out what RFID is, because you're going to eventually be asked by one of your retail partners to put RFID tags on the product. I don't think there's any question about that.
I agree. Let's move on to this is actually talking to the actual adoption rates, and this is one of your charts.
Yep. So
you want to talk to this one?
Well, it's not one of my charts. It's one of Auburn RFID charts. This is Justin Patton's chart, but this was shown at RFID Journal this year. Obviously, you can see the growth from 2018 with 14 billion to 45 billion in 2023. It's growing outside of just retail as well. This chart was actually given by the folks from UPS, which are fully leveraging RFID for package tracking inside their supply chain. Again, that's public knowledge, so I'm not sharing anything that I shouldn't be sharing, but they are clearly leveraging that. Basically, you want to be able to know what you have and where it's located, even in the package industry. I think 45 billion is probably a pretty good estimate, and I would expect that 2024 and beyond, the numbers are going to continue to grow. I don't think there's any question about that.
I agree. And in fact, the next chart talks exactly about the same thing in terms of the adoption rate increasing. And you can see even Avery Dennison. But what's optimistic on here that points to the other questions is actually in the bottom right. What it's saying is that apparel was the major driver in 22. But if you look at even Avery Dennison pipeline in 23 and beyond, it's actually well beyond just apparel. So it's going into much broader categories, which tells you that the retailer that asked the question about some of the other categories, it is happening, but ultimately it's got to be driven by the retailer. So I don't know if you want to make any short comments, because I want to get to the use case. That's an important topic.
Yeah. So here's the other thing that a retailer can help with. Collaborating with other retailers and say, we want to go this way with RFID. Let me give you an example. Right now, we know how to do RFID for a pair of socks, apparel. We know how to do it for shoes. We know how to do it for electronics. You start getting into categories like beauty, specifically cosmetics, fragrances, etc. Lots of challenges. Very small product, very aesthetically. It has to be aesthetically pleasing. I can't just slap a big old RFID tag on a thing lipstick and allow it to be aesthetically pleasing. So there's some R&D that has to be happening on the front end of this with some of the tag suppliers and the packaging folks to figure out how do you make this work, but it actually not destroy the professionalism and the artwork, et cetera. So here's the deal. Don't just decide, hey, tomorrow we're going to do RFID for cosmetics. Let's go ahead and work with the industry now and tell the Avery Dennisons of the world and folks like that, hey, we're going this way. They probably already know it. But if you start to get a lot of retailers going, we want to go this way for cosmetics, we want to have that work done before the ask has even occurred. And that to me is the importance of working in this industry. Because here's the deal. When a supplier like Max Factor puts an RFID tag, it has to be aesthetically pleasing. It has to work. And by the way, I want to do it one way for all my retailers, leveraging GS1 standards and Auburn standards. I can't have a different way to do it from Walmart versus Target, et cetera. It's got to be one way to make it easier for adoption. But to me, that's what's going to be really the issue right now. To me, there's a challenge with just the aesthetics and the ability to make a tag small enough that it actually reads and works effectively. So we need to work.
Yeah, I totally agree, because the branding folks are going to be the biggest barrier to actually getting anything done in the store if you totally destroy that beautiful packaging that they designed.
Exactly. By the way, cosmetics is a no-brainer for me. You want to talk about something that's hard to know, what do you have and where's it located? And a customer who's going to go in and go, I don't want that shade. I want this shade, and you don't have that shade. I don't care how many thousand shades you got. If you don't have the one that my wife's looking for, you're out of stock. Right. And order from Amazon. So a huge opportunity in the cosmetics, by the way, for shrink as well.
So this is another chart that talks about counterfeiting data, and that was this in the.
Yeah, but go to the next one too, because 2017 was a small number. Now it's gotten bigger. So
yeah, this actually was one of the questions. That's why I wanted to include it. This actually one of the questions that came in.
All of the things that we've talked about so far have been knowing what I have inside a physical store and knowing where it's located. RFID does a really, really good job of doing that. As we start to think about other use cases, remember we said we're going to tag it at source. So when it's manufactured, we're going to tag it. One of the things that retailers and suppliers have, and I'm just going to pick on this bottom number here, claims. Tony, I ordered 52 of something from you and I only got 20. Okay? So I'm going to create a claim against you. And your answer is, based upon us, we sent you all 50. Well, I only got 20. Well, I sent you 50. And we play this game back and forth, right? We have no data other than to say, I shipped it, well, I didn't get it. But that's about the only thing you got. If you start leveraging RFID, I go, okay, you asked for 50. Here are the 50, what I'm going to call serialized numbers that I'm putting in a case that's going to you. And when you get them, if you don't get all 50, then I can prove to you that when they left my facility, they're all 50 were there. If you only got 20, then let's go talk to whoever transported it because they probably took some out of the box, right? It puts accountability, again, without somebody sitting there scanning everything and auditing things. It allows us to be able to leverage, did I actually get what I paid for? And the argument goes away. So claims are a huge opportunity. Counterfeiting. People like Nike spend millions of dollars, billions of dollars on that Nike swoosh. It's not hard to rip off that Nike swoosh and send a whole bunch of stuff into a retailer going, what's this Nike product, but I'm selling it for half the cost. Well, wait a minute. Now you're creating a negative situation for Nike where you're selling my brand at less than half the cost. It's because it's counterfeit. So whether it's pharmaceuticals or branded items like Nike, I can now tell you these are the serialized numbers of every single Nike item. If you're selling Nike stuff that's not one of these serial numbers, it's counterfeit. Do something about it, right? It gives you the ability to track that, including, did I really get the right pharmaceuticals? Did I get the right prescription, et cetera? Counterfeiting and claims have a huge opportunity. And then I'm sure we're going to talk about shrink here in a second in the retail store. But to me, these are updated numbers. These are big, big numbers that we have the potential with RFID to be able to provide the visibility we need to be able to have that awareness.
I agree. Let me keep going here just to make sure. So use cases, one of my favorite charts. Let's talk about use cases. I'm going to let you tackle it first.
Oh boy, I'm going to talk fast. So where most retailers start is the bottom of the triangle. If I improve my on-hand accuracy, and AKA know what I have and know where it's located, I should be able to have the product available for the customers. I should be able to increase sales. I don't think a 2% increase of sales is out of the question for anybody. Matter of fact, side note, Auburn University and I are actually doing a research project with 3 universities to measure on-hand accuracy and its impact on sales and buy online, pick up in store and inventory levels. We're going to execute that in 2024, more to follow there, but it's going to come out of the Auburn University. People want to know if I move from on-hand accuracy from 50% to 95%, what kind of sales lift do I get? What kind of online impact do I have? So that's the base of the triangle where everybody starts. I think the next set of use cases, and I'll put it a shameless plug because I have my good friend Joe Cole from Macy's going to be joining me on an upcoming podcast, leveraging RFID for the purpose of asset protection, knowing exactly what you got. Did I get everything I paid for from a receiving standpoint? And did things leave the store that got paid for? Or did things, more importantly, leave the store that didn't get paid for? To me, and this will be interesting given the folks at people like Sensormatic, they've traditionally used electronic article surveillance to do that. Great technology. It's going to be around for a while. But that all it does is say something's leaving the building, didn't get paid for. RFID allows me to know exactly what left the store, when it left the store, and exactly what was in that particular store. And then we could talk about asset protection for a long time. To me, asset protection is a big issue right now in the industry, more than ever. RFID has the ability to give the information that people need to know where is this bleeding, if you will, coming from. We've already talked about elimination of food waste. We already mentioned that with the markdowns. The claims reduction, I kind of walked you through that with the whole, you sent me 25 and I expected 50, et cetera. The other two here are backroom picking. People are going to start to get, and we'll flip to the next slide here in a second. People are going to start to look at other use cases beyond just, is my inventory accurate? And that's going to require potentially fixed infrastructure to do that. And the last one is supplier insights. They're spending 25 years with P&G. I can tell, all I can see is how much I ship to you or how much I sell. I can't see where it's selling from. RFID and fixed infrastructure allows me to know exactly where the product's being sold from, and a lot of other information that I believe suppliers would be willing to help monetize and take advantage of to really understand where their stuff is selling from.
Yeah, good point. And we're actually going to make these charts available to the audience. Okay. I'm just going to quickly say that in the loss prevention space, just to reinforce it, RFID came out as #1 technology in the latest NRF shrink survey. So it is top of mind, and some retailers are doing a really good job. And again, we're going to make these charts available. But I want to make sure we get to this, because in terms of the variety of ways that you can actually apply RFID. So go ahead, Michael. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I won't take you through all of these various things. It relates back to that triangle slide I said before. So if all you want to do is measure on-hand accuracy and on-shelf availability and markdown, the data capture. So there's two parts of RFID. There's the tag itself, and then there's the data capture, which is how do you read those tags? If you do a cycle count once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a day, it doesn't matter. The things you could do with it are basically in this top left-hand column, which is on-hand accuracy, fill rate, markdowns, and potentially eliminating the annual inventory as you do. As you start leveraging it for back of house to front of house replenishment, real-time updates, location accuracy, asset tracking, shrink reporting, etc., you start to have to need something that looks like a minimal viable product, that looks like some fixed infrastructures at the back of the store, transition to the sales floor and the exit of the store. And this thing over there on the right-hand side next to this fixed reader is basically a robot. There's an opportunity to have robotics. There's a company out there like Badger Robotics that actually has our robotics that scan the shelf. They can have RFID readers on them as well, so you don't have to give somebody a wand and manually collect it. And then you get all the way over here to what I would say is the full fixed infrastructure where it's continuously reading all the time. And there's a lot more things you can do it in terms of real-time updates, location accuracy real-time, electronic proof of delivery, and some other things like that. Again, Tony, this is probably a podcast by itself to go through all this. I agree. I don't want to try and minimize it, but you have to understand your business case, which is that triangle, and then say, okay, I'm going to get into this business. What's the data capture? Most people do a wand first, which is great. But if you want to leverage some of the asset protection and real-time continuous monitoring, you got to invest in infrastructure that's beyond a wand.
I totally agree. And in fact, there are some retailers already moving towards a full infrastructure, but it was a journey. It wasn't, you start in different places and end up in different places depending on where you're at on your journey. So let me go to this slide, which had some important additional thoughts that I want you to start wrapping us up with.
Yeah. So let me wrap it up with a couple of things. And this can sound a little bit confusing, but I think it's important to cover. Number one, we have already talked about, if you're a retailer that's an apparel retailer or a sporting retailer, I can see a day where 100% of your business is going to be RFID. No question about it. If you're a club or a mass merchandiser like a Walmart or a Target, you're going to have to come up with different sensor signals that are going to be able to tell you what do I have and where is it located. Some of your product will be RFID. Great. Some of it will have to require computer vision. Some of it will be 2D barcode. Some of it will be Digimark. Some of it will be Bluetooth. Not to try and go into details, but each item is going to have a different sensor that said they all feed into ability to say, what do I have and where is it located? Number two, serialization. RFID's premise is a UPC and a unique serial number. And Tony, you and I well know, we've been around retail long enough, that UPC quantity has always been what it is. So it's a G10 or the UPC, I've got 5 of them. Well, with serialization, which is part of RFID, but it doesn't have to be RFID, Sunrise 2027 is going to give you a new platform where every retailer is going to be able to scan a 2D barcode, which gives you a lot more information. So I think about serialization, that means a UPC and a unique number, almost like the VIN number of your car. It's unique to that selling item, which the exact same item below it, same UPC, has a different VIN number. So serialization or serialized G10s are going to be the future. People who are not familiar with that concept need to understand Sunrise 2027, which is part of GS1. And the only other two are just, hey, we talk a lot about this kind of stuff on the onshelfavailability.com platform and Conversations on Retail. Stay up to speed of this, put it as part of your podcast, because there's stuff going on all the time that I think it's important for the retailers and the suppliers community to understand.
So excellent webinar. You did an excellent job being on the other side of the microphone. So congratulations. So you're going to have to give me that test at some point. So we'll have to alternate and do this. But it's been a pleasure. I know there are some questions. Let me ask real quick, and we got a minute. So
absolutely.
Any new innovation that excites you in RFID right now?
Any unique, here's the deal. RFID has been the same since we put the first tag on a World War II plane, right? I mean, it's been the same. What's interesting is two things. Number one, I think it's interesting that we have other use cases other than what do I have and where's it located. That to me is that triangle is interesting because we've always asked for it to be supplier source tagged. Now with claims and some of those other things, I think we will definitely see the value of doing it upstream, number one. Number two, and the shameless plug for Auburn, we're seeing it in other verticals as well. So things like aircraft, for those of you who are potentially going to go to the RFID board meeting coming up here in September, we're going to host it at Cape Canaveral. NASA uses RFID a lot. We're seeing it in food service industry. McDonald's is using it for things. So what's interesting is the technology hasn't fundamentally changed. People are just coming up with more and more use cases beyond just, toll roads and car washes. They're using it for other things, and it's really starting to make an impact to the industry.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you very much to the entire audience. We appreciate. Look for the replay for the ones that were not able. We do have a big retail event coming up October 18th. Look for that in my social media channel. We got people on there from around the world that will speak about the future of retail. And with that, signing off. Thank you all. Thank you, Michael.
Yep. Have a great day, everybody.